The new priest and his deepest secret. They said Father Elijah was different the moment he arrived at St. Augustine's parish. Young, barely 30, with sharp green eyes and a smile that could calm even the most restless souls. But beneath the polished sermons and the calm presence, there was something else. Something no one could quite name. I noticed it the first time our eyes met after Sunday Mass. A hesitation in his gaze, a flicker of something hidden just beneath his perfectly controlled expression. And I should have looked away. I should have ignored it like everyone else. But I didn't. That's how it all began, with a glance too long, a confession never spoken aloud, and a secret he carried in the silence of his prayers. Stay with me until the end, because what I discovered about Father Elijah will change the way you see love, faith, and forgiveness forever. And before you leave, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like this video, and turn on notifications. What happens next, you won't want to miss. The first time I saw Father Elijah, he wasn't standing behind the altar. He was sitting alone in the garden behind the church, his black clerical shirt clinging slightly to his chest in the afternoon heat, collar perfectly straight, hands clasped together as if trying to hold something inside that was moments from escaping. I hadn't meant to be there. I usually took the long way around the parish, avoiding the reminders of the faith I'd long since abandoned. But something that day, curiosity, boredom, maybe even fate, pulled me toward that garden. He didn't notice me at first. His head was bowed, lips moving in silent prayer or maybe a plea to something higher than himself. His face was young, much younger than any priest I'd ever known. Sharp jawline, faint stubble betraying a man still struggling to look older than he really was. Then, like he sensed my eyes on him, his gaze lifted and locked on mine. For a second, neither of us moved. His eyes weren't just green, they were intense, like they held entire storms he'd spent years trying to control. And in that single glance, I saw it. Loneliness, a weight too heavy for one man to carry, and something else, something forbidden. I broke the stare first, embarrassed to be caught. "Didn't mean to interrupt," I muttered, turning to leave. His voice stopped me, soft but firm. "You're not interrupting. This garden isn't just for prayers. Sometimes it's for finding peace, or losing it." I turned back slowly. He stood now, the sunlight framing his figure like something out of a Renaissance painting, too perfect to be real, too human to be holy. "I'm Caleb," I said before I could second-guess myself. "Elijah," he answered, stepping closer and extending his hand. His grip was firm but warm, his eyes never leaving mine. We stood there for a beat longer than we should have, his thumb brushing slightly against the side of my hand before he let go. "I haven't seen you at Mass," he said, his tone careful, like he wasn't sure if it was a question or an accusation. "Yeah, not really my thing," I admitted, stuffing my hands into my pockets. "Guess I've had enough of being told who I'm supposed to be." Something flickered across his face then, a shadow of understanding, or regret. I couldn't tell which. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "we spend so long trying to be who everyone wants us to be that we forget who we really are." His words hit harder than they should have. And before I could find something clever to say, the old church bells rang in the distance, their deep chimes breaking whatever fragile connection had formed between us. He gave me a small, knowing smile. "I should go prepare for the evening Mass." I nodded, already feeling the cold rush back in as he turned to leave. But just before he disappeared through the stone archway, he glanced back over his shoulder. "Caleb," he said, his voice lower now, barely above the breeze. "Sometimes it's okay not to have all the answers. Sometimes it's just about asking the right questions." And then he was gone. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the way he looked at me, like he was asking for help without ever saying it. And as much as I told myself to forget it, to forget him, I knew I'd be back in that garden the next day. And this time, I wouldn't just walk away. The next day, the sky hung low and gray, as if the heavens themselves were too heavy with secrets. I told myself I wouldn't go back to the church. I told myself it was a coincidence, a passing moment that didn't need to mean anything. But as the afternoon dragged on, my feet moved on their own, and before I realized it, I was standing at the heavy wooden doors of St. Augustine's again. This time, I walked in. The sanctuary was nearly empty. The scent of old incense clung to the air, mixing with the faint smell of candle wax. Sunlight filtered through stained glass, casting fractured rainbows across the polished stone floor. I stood there, uncertain, until a voice echoed softly from the side chapel. "And forgive us our trespasses." It was him. Father Elijah. I followed the sound, my steps quiet against the cold floor, and there he was, kneeling alone before the altar, his hands clasped tightly together. His head was bowed low, and for a moment, he looked like any man overwhelmed by the weight of his own heart. Before I could think better of it, I called out to him, "Elijah!" He startled, his shoulders stiffening before he turned toward me. For a brief second, I saw the mask slip again, the calm, practiced expression faltering just enough to show the storm underneath. "Caleb," he said, standing and smoothing his hands down the front of his clerical shirt. "Didn't expect to see you here." "Neither did I admitted, my voice barely above the quiet hum of the flickering candles. "But here I am." He studied me for a long moment, his green eyes unreadable. Then, with a small gesture, he motioned toward the confessional booth tucked in the corner. "Walk with me," he said, his voice lower now, rougher around the edges. I followed him inside. The wooden panel between us felt thin, almost useless. His voice came through the grate, soft but clear. "You don't strike me as someone who came here for confession," he said, a faint trace of humor, or maybe regret, threading through his words. "Maybe I just wanted to talk," I replied, my palms pressed against my knees to keep them from shaking. The silence between us stretched out, filled only by the soft creak of the old wood and the faint echo of my own heartbeat. "Isn't that what this place is for?" I asked finally. "For saying the things we're too afraid to say anywhere else?" He took a slow, audible breath. "Sometimes it's harder to speak in the dark than in the light," he murmured. My chest tightened. "Then let me ask you something, Elijah. Do you ever wonder if maybe the life you're living isn't the one you're supposed to live?" The air seemed to shift between us, charged with something heavier than words. His answer came after what felt like an eternity. "Every single day," he said quietly. "And every day, I fight it. Because if I don't..." His voice cracked, just barely. "I'm afraid of what I'll do if I stop fighting." My throat went dry. I leaned closer, my fingers tracing the carved edges of the confessional panel, as if I could somehow reach through it. "Elijah," I whispered, "what are you so afraid of?" Another long pause. Then his voice, barely audible through the wooden grate. "Of wanting something I can't have, of being seen, and losing everything I've built to keep it all under control." My heart ached at the raw honesty in his words, and though the wall between us was thin, it might as well have been 1,000 miles. "You don't have to lose everything," I said quietly. "Maybe. You just have to find what's worth keeping." I heard him stand abruptly. The door to the confessional creaked open, and when I stepped out, he was already walking away, his head down, hands clenched tight at his sides. I wanted to call after him, to pull him back. But sometimes the hardest battles are the ones we fight alone before we're ready to ask for help. And deep down, I knew his walls were cracking. It was only a matter of time before they came crashing down. For days, I didn't see him. Not in the garden, not in the chapel, not even during the times I knew he should be leading Mass. It was like Father Elijah had disappeared into the very walls of the church. And as much as I tried to convince myself that it wasn't my place to worry, every part of me felt drawn back to that confessional booth, to the unfinished words hanging in the air between us. By the fourth day, the tension inside me reached its breaking point. I needed to find him, not for some dramatic confrontation, but because I couldn't stand the silence anymore. The church was nearly empty when I arrived that evening, the kind of quiet that made every footstep sound like a sin. "Father Elijah?" I called softly, my voice echoing against the stone walls. No response. Then I remembered something, a small staircase tucked behind the vestry, leading up to the private living quarters where the priests stayed. It felt wrong to even think about going there, but my feet moved before my conscience caught up. The old stairs creaked under my weight, the narrow hallway at the top lined with closed wooden doors. I didn't know which one was his, but something told me I'd recognize it when I saw it. And I did. The door at the very end stood slightly ajar, faint light spilling through the gap. My heart pounded so loud it drowned out every logical thought. I raised my hand, hesitated for a moment, and then gently pushed it open. He was there, sitting on the edge of his small bed, his head in his hands, his clerical collar discarded on the nightstand beside him. His black shirt was unbuttoned at the top, sleeves rolled up, revealing strong forearms inked with faint scars and a tattoo. I froze. There, curling just beneath his left bicep, was a delicate design, an anchor entwined with a broken chain. Something about it felt deeply personal, like a reminder of a life he left behind but couldn't quite forget. He looked up then, startled, his eyes wide and unguarded. "Caleb." His voice cracked, and for the first time he looked completely lost. Sorry, I shouldn't have," I started, already stepping back. "No," he said quickly, standing up. "Stay." The room was small, painfully simple. A single bed, a wooden chair, and a small cross above the headboard. But the air was heavy with something unsaid. He crossed the room toward me, his movements hesitant but full of purpose. "I haven't been avoiding you," he said, his voice rough, his eyes never leaving mine. "I've been avoiding myself." I swallowed hard, every nerve in my body alight with tension. "Why, Elijah? What are you so afraid will happen if you just stop running?" He stood just inches away from me now, the space between us thick with everything neither of us dared to say. "Because if I stop, I'm afraid I'll fall. And if I fall—" His voice faltered. He reached out then, his fingers brushing against mine, so soft it felt like a question. "Maybe falling isn't the worst thing," I whispered, my voice trembling. And then he broke. One moment he was standing there, and the next his forehead pressed against mine, his hands cupping my face like I was the only steady thing left in his world. His breath was warm against my lips, his hands trembling as his thumb traced along my jawline. This can't be right," he breathed. But his lips were already brushing against mine, his resolve unraveling with every second. And when he finally kissed me, it wasn't gentle. It was everything he'd held back, every silent prayer, every tortured night spent wondering if he'd ever feel whole again. I kissed him back like I'd been waiting my entire life for that exact moment. The world fell away. It didn't matter that we were standing behind locked doors in a place meant for vows and virtue. In that moment, there was nothing but the truth. The raw, terrifying, beautiful truth neither of us could run from any longer. The hours that followed were a blur. I don't know how long we stood there, our foreheads pressed together, barely speaking, afraid that the smallest word might shatter the fragile space we'd created. Outside the small room, the world kept turning, but inside, time held its breath. "Elijah," I whispered, his name barely making it past my lips. He shook his head slowly, eyes closed, his hands still cupping my face. "Don't say it," he breathed, his voice breaking under the weight of emotions he could no longer hide. "Because if you say it, I don't know if I'll have the strength to walk away again." And God, the thing was, I didn't want him to. "Then don't," I said simply, my voice steadier than I felt. "Don't walk away. Not from this. Not from me." His eyes finally opened, and the look in them nearly brought me to my knees. Fear, hope, a desperate hunger to feel something real, something untainted by guilt or duty. "You don't understand, Caleb," he murmured, his thumb gently tracing over my bottom lip. "I've spent years building walls around this part of me. If I let them fall," his voice caught, "I don't know who I'll be anymore." I took his trembling hands and pressed them against my chest. "Then be whoever you are right now, with me, just for tonight." His breath hitched, his forehead leaning against mine again. And then, in the faintest voice, he confessed, "This isn't the first time I've felt this." My heart skipped. "I thought I could bury it," he continued. "With the priesthood, with vows, with silence. But every time I closed my eyes, it came back, this longing I couldn't pray away. And then you showed up, and suddenly it wasn't just a distant memory. It was real." I swallowed hard, my hands tightening around his. "Do you regret this?" I asked quietly. He shook his head, the faintest smile pulling at his lips even through the tears threatening his composure. "No," he said. "And that terrifies me more than anything." In that fragile moment, it wasn't about sin or salvation. It wasn't about doctrine or damnation. It was just two men standing in the quiet space between who they were told to be and who they truly were. "Elijah," I whispered, tilting his face up to meet my eyes. "You don't have to fight this alone anymore." His lips parted like he wanted to say something, to argue, but no words came. Instead, he leaned in again, this time slower, more certain. And when his lips met mine, it wasn't desperate like before. It was soft, careful, reverent even. His hand slid from my face to my shoulders, pulling me closer until there was no space left between us. And in that kiss, I felt the truth neither of us could deny. This wasn't just a passing moment. This was the start of everything. But even as the world narrowed to just the sound of our breath and the warmth of our bodies pressed together, reality crept back in like a cold draft under a locked door. A sharp knock echoed through the hallway. "Elijah!" We froze. It was the voice of the elder priest, Father Benedict, stern, unwavering, and the last person either of us wanted to hear in that moment. Elijah stepped back, panic flashing through his eyes. "Caleb, you have to go," he whispered, already moving toward the door. "If he finds you here." "Will this just keep happening?" I asked, my heart pounding in my throat. He turned back, his eyes filled with the kind of torment that words couldn't touch. "I don't know," he admitted. "But if it does, I'll find the courage to face it next time." Before I could say more, he pressed a quick kiss to my forehead, his lips lingering for just a second longer than they should have. Then he opened the door, his shoulders squared, his face once again the perfect image of calm. But I saw it, that tiny tremble in his hand as he closed the door behind me. And as I stepped back out into the cold night air, I knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The days that followed were agonizing. Every second felt like a silent war between my head and my heart. I avoided the church, thinking maybe distance would dull the edges of whatever this was, but it didn't. The memory of his kiss lingered like a prayer unanswered, repeating itself every time I closed my eyes. I told myself to move on, to let him wrestle with his choices alone. But the truth was, I was just as lost as he was. By the third night, as the sun sank behind the horizon, painting the sky in soft shades of regret, I found myself once again outside St. Augustine's. I didn't even remember deciding to walk there. My feet simply brought me back to him. Before I could convince myself to turn around, the heavy oak doors creaked open. And there he was, Elijah, standing in the doorway, illuminated by the faint golden glow of candlelight behind him. His collar was off, shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows, his face pale, but his eyes brighter than I'd ever seen them. "I was hoping you'd come," he said quietly. My breath caught in my throat. I wasn't sure I should. "Neither was I," he admitted, stepping back to let me in. This time there were no nervous glances, no hesitation. He took my hand the moment the doors closed behind us, his fingers warm, his grip strong despite the tremor I could still feel beneath the surface. We didn't speak as he led me down a narrow corridor I'd never seen before. It felt hidden, secret, almost sacred. When we emerged, we were in a small, private prayer room. "This is where I go when I can't pray," Elijah said, his voice low and thick with emotion. "Where I come when I need to be honest with myself." I turned to him, my heart pounding. "And what do you need to be honest about tonight?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached out and gently touched my cheek, his fingers tracing the line of my jaw like he was memorizing every inch of me. "That for the first time in years," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm not afraid to feel something, and I don't want to hide it anymore." Before I could respond, his lips found mine again, this time without the weight of hesitation. It was slow, deep, and filled with everything we hadn't dared say aloud. His arms wrapped around me, pulling me against him, and for the first time, I felt him completely let go. No walls, no guilt, just raw, undeniable desire. But even in the middle of it, I knew this couldn't last forever. Not like this. When he finally pulled back, his forehead resting against mine, his breath shallow, I asked the question that had been burning inside me since the moment we met. "Elijah, what happens now?" He opened his eyes slowly, his expression torn between hope and fear. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I know I don't want to lose this. Not you." He took my hand and pressed it against his chest, over his heart. "Stay," he whispered. "Just stay with me tonight. No expectations, no promises. Just stay." And despite everything, despite knowing the chaos this would bring, I said yes. Because sometimes, faith isn't about knowing the path ahead. It's about taking the next step, even when you're terrified. That night, we didn't talk about the future. We didn't talk about what was right or wrong. We simply existed, in the same space, in the same silence, wrapped in each other's arms. And as dawn crept through the stained glass windows, painting soft colors across his bare shoulders, I realized something. Sometimes salvation doesn't come from a sermon or a prayer. Sometimes it comes from finally allowing yourself to love.